right. So thank you again, everybody, for being here today. The morning was already very intense. So many topics, so many great speakers. But the afternoon, I think, is even more intense. So get ready because we start with a crazy topic. I mean, amazing hot topic, public goods in the age of AI and Web3, of course. So we are Web3 for good. I'm very happy and honored to have today here with us Vishal Kapadia. He has great experience in terms of public goods. He's been like 15 years working on all around public goods, right? And he has, I think, unique views and stances of what means public goods until today and what we may expect in the future. That's why also we are discussing about AI. So I now leave the stage to Vishal, a friend. And thank you again for being here today. I hope you will enjoy this first keynote of the afternoon. Thank you, Vishal.
Thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks for everyone who's made it back in after lunch. I hope your energy is good. And I'll talk you through a little bit of my experience in public goods and how I see things kind of evolving over the last years, and also the impact of Web3 and now AI on the sector. So that's me. That was me at my wedding. It's my nicest picture of me, so I tend to put it places. I've never really done a headshot, so you get to see me looking at you for once. And yeah, my background's been very much in growth, strategy, Web3, and now AI. So I'm going back full circle. 20 years ago, I studied psychology and neuroscience at Oxford and kind of pivoted into neuroeconomics and marketing and new economic systems. And now with the rise of AI, I think it's a very interesting time for systems architecture and intelligent systems architecture, which is, I think, also very relevant to the public goods world. So yeah, my background is WikiRate, which was kind of sustainability and bringing more sustainability data on chain, sorry, not on chain, into the open source world. And then Endowment was kind of overseeing $100 million of donations going, that was on chain. Also worked with KlimaDAO, which were bringing carbon credits on chain. And yeah, I've been doing some research on AI and now working with some AI companies in Europe. And that's me on Twitter if you want to find me. So I wanted to start with what is a public good? So I don't know, everyone here is here for a public goods conference, and I think everyone maybe has a slightly different opinion or idea of what a public good is. I'm going to tell you how I see it. And I think, it's grounded in either a common service or a common ground. There's like loads of interesting developments in countries all over the world over many years, whether it's a healthcare system, whether it's welfare, whether it's access to common spaces, or just empowering societies. And obviously, as the internet became a huge thing and connected people, we got into the world of open source and commons media as well, with like the wiki and everything that kind of fired up from there. Since then, we've seen a massive evolution with Web3, where not only do you have common spaces that are digital, you also have common governance and distributed governance, distributed computation and systems of collective intelligence really coming to the fore. And now we're getting to this idea of not just the goods and the intelligence being distributed, but the whole system becoming multipolar, multi-interactive, and increasingly agentic. So I think that's bringing up very interesting problems and solutions. So yeah, like my background was, first of all, in Web2. We started a European Commission-based project. We raised about 4 million euros to build the first ever open-sourced data platform for all of the environmental, social data that's out there. And we ended up becoming kind of the only available resource that published all the data on modern slavery, statements on conflict minerals. We worked with large NGOs, the UN, and also many universities around the world to build kind of one of the biggest kind of greenfield data resources out there. Before that, you could only get this data through a Bloomberg terminal at 10K per annum. So that was my kind of fighting the good fight. I kind of pivoted from there into KlimaDAO, where we were looking at what could we do with getting carbon assets on chain. And I think that was a very interesting experiment. I'll talk about it a little bit more. And then endowment, and been very, very active in a lot of public goods communities. I was speaking to one of the nouns here today about one of the proposals I've done, and I think the whole world is quite connected as well. And then with AI, so as I mentioned, I started with neuroscience, and recently I published a paper on the effects, that's the reference if you're interested, on the it's an open knowledge paper, on the impacts of LLMs on knowledge work, and this idea of kind of expectation inflation. People really expect it to solve everything, but what's it actually doing? How do you implement AI in a useful way and LLMs in a useful way? And now I've been also kind of exploring models for, how does multi-agent architecture work with like an executive functioning system? How does privacy matter? And what are the deeper applications for LLMs? Through that, I'm also working with a kind of a deep tech startup called Alien International. If anyone's working with AI at the moment, it's quite an interesting way to build a private layer for deployment of your own data or your own LLMs. So I think this is something I just always also reference, but in the EU, and given that we're in the EU, I think it's relevant to mention, there's been a huge culture around open source. I think many people don't realize or may not realize that how important the European community has been to the founding of open source principles. There've been two kind of license streams that I saw, and this is something like all of these things are things I could talk for hours about, but very, very simply, there was kind of very, very open source, which is Creative Commons, and then there's kind of the open source that can close at some point and become more commercial. And I think that's kind of set the stage for how we also have taken things forward in Web3. And I think it's really interesting when you see like the Chaos Computer Club in Berlin and kind of how that led to, I was in Berlin for about 10 years and you could see the Ethereum being coded as it was being built post-Bitcoin live. And I think there's this idea also of civic technology. So what is infrastructure that we need as society? And there's been a lot of work on that, funding for that. The success is, debatable. And I think like public goods and Web3 was also a big part of the foundation. So I think everyone here is familiar with Gitcoin and their influence on the beginning of the scene. And, we're here in a public good that was also funded by one of the founders of Ethereum. And I think we're all kind of, a lot of us will hopefully be aware of a lot of the great projects that have come up in the space. My perception is that a lot of the communities have declined. A lot of ecosystems haven't survived. I'm quite close to some folks who used to be at Gitcoin. Sadly, I think they saw a contraction of 150 people at peak to maybe a handful now, less than 10 for sure, from what I've heard. And there are still like new threads in the system. And I think, it's really important that we learn from what's worked, what's not worked, and also build on the infrastructure that's already been created and that's evergreen. What I've found this year is the narrative's really moved in Web3 towards wealth. And there's a lot of kind of oligopolistic or plutocratic kind of systems in Web3 now. When you go to conferences, you'll often see, the consensus event, the Coinbase event, everyone's just hustling to get past that gated line, to have the best access. I think that's sort of changed the ecosystem a little bit as well. So yeah, I'll speak very briefly about refi. This was a term that people who've been around since, let's say, 21, 22 in the scene might have heard of. This idea of regenerative finance, where you have ways of bringing things with more sophisticated economic models that leverage kind of Web3. We did something with KlimaDAO where we were almost burned by our own success in terms of something like 20 million of tons of carbon came on chain in a period of 3 or 4 weeks. And it disrupted the whole industry to the point that there was more scrutiny and people started disassociating themselves from the credits that they actually authorized in the first place, because there was an existential threat to the standard setters, which often is a problem with public goods. It's something I saw also with WikiRate. And I think it's been very interesting because I've been speaking to new projects who are doing real world assets, whether it's gold or mines or like real world mines that are tokenized. And people have started to realize also from seeing how companies did in that era, how important having a secondary market is, having collateralization is, and all these sorts of things. But there was a map of all the refi projects. If you Google it and you go back, there's maybe 400 or 500 projects. Like, you wonder where they are now, unfortunately. But it's definitely an important part of the foundation of public goods in Web3. So after that, I went on to endowment, and looking for a bit more impact in the work as well as financial impacts. And endowment was very successful. The founder, I was head of growth there, and the founder basically wanted to do what he could do with his Apple stock, with his appreciated crypto, put it into a donor advised fund, which is a very interesting financial vehicle. It's a $250 billion vehicle globally, where you can effectively offset your tax and create your own kind of personal endowment or a fund. And it's very similar to a wealth management product. Like, if you want to invest in ETFs, or if you're already high net worth, then there are lots of ways you can allocate your investments. And it was very interesting because this product exists for philanthropy, but it was never a central product. It was always a secondary product. It was, what can you do on your tax, and what do you want to do for good after you've managed your wealth? There are some exceptions. There's a San Francisco Community Foundation and a few other big ones, but generally that's the case. But yeah, the problem we saw there was once we hit like the crypto natives, the literacy for on-chain kind of wasn't there. So you kind of had to go, okay, how do we get into traditional finance? So that was a very interesting one, trying to understand like what the route into traditional finance was, how to sell like Web3, and also just the benefits of Web3. So you see kind of on the right, you've got the stats at the top, but then we went kind of from donors to financial advisors, institutions, and that was a lot of fun kind of setting that up, and it's still in motion. And I think the target's to get to 1 billion there as well on chain. So I think it's important also to mention the modern concerns. So I was quite involved with a lot of the lobbying groups like Blockchain Association. One of our investors at Endowment was part of the Fair Shake PAC. They were the biggest ever super PAC in history, all focused on getting a fair shake for crypto. It's very interesting. If you look at the data with Stand With Crypto in the last American election, almost all of the seats leaned crypto positive. And it seemed to be, by correlation, a very large election issue as well. But because of the regulatory environment, stable coins, propagated, meme coins propagated. They were pretty much the only thing the SEC didn't pursue actively in that generation. And we've got some interesting projects like the DeSci movement, really leveraged kind of the pump.fun piece. And then we had dogs with hats and fart coins and all sorts of fun stuff like that as well. And then since 2024, I think there's been a big market movement towards wealth coming on chain. So BlackRock set up a 1 billion fund just investing in treasuries on chain. Like, there are important custodial layers that are being produced now. And I've been to some conferences where you just see it's like Wolf of Wall Street in terms of like how much capital's coming in and the speed it's coming in. But in terms of the builders, I think AI has been stealing the narrative and also the capital, because a lot of the VC funding's kind of dried up, and that's definitely affected public goods as kind of almost a luxury within the industry rather than a central concern. So where are we now? So I like to think of AI as a public good, and there was a really interesting kind of tweet from Sam Altman recently about something called the dead internet theory, the idea that the internet, it's no longer people talking to people, it's just bots talking to bots. And I have two different conflicting views on this. One is, with AI, it's very interesting because you can actually make the bots more intelligent. So you have a more intelligent agentic internet. And on the other hand, whatever you kind of control for and design for is going to be amplified by 1,000-fold. So there's a very interesting one opinion from like Tristan Harris. I've been following him for about 10 or 15 years, and he talks about in his podcast, Your Divided Attention, the impact of social media and the algorithmic nature of it, how it sequesters attention. And there's two schools of thought here, I think, evolving, which is, how do you make it like really, really exciting and do really interesting applications? And then how do you regulate it when it's unregulatable as well? So I think this is where I think AI needs to be a public good. And, there's always some debates in the background around that with, open AI, whether it's open or not. And I think Web3 definitely has some lessons learned, if not some systems for that. But like the TLDR with the AI is things are going down in terms of cost. Like spoke to someone who's head of media at WPP India, and they said now they can produce a short for something like 1/10 or 1/5, like 5% of the price, because all the production costs are gone. So it's very interesting to see how it's affected prototyping, deployments, and we're just at day one of AI. So we've just seen like the GPT App Store come out, which is a ring-fenced environment. It's a walled garden, and you see lots of different culturally different approaches. And I think we haven't really even seen the first stage be fully deployed there. The company I'm working for, they've got competition, and it's all around distributed compute, like innovation on privacy and innovation on who owns your data, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also a lot of movement towards sovereign adoption. So, Germany signed some contracts with OpenAI. What does that mean? Again, all of these things could be discussed for a long time, but I'm just trying to give a surface view. But yeah, we've seen with smart contracts and stable coins, which, thankfully has been a huge innovation. There's a lot you can do. And again, also in public goods with automating payments and some smart kind of architecture. So I think what's next is probably my final slide. It's important to regulate. You can see how we can ride the capital wave. There's so much money coming into crypto still. And figure out kind of innovative ways of deploying capital. I saw Octant is here. I think that's actually a really interesting model. I've seen people doing this with DeFi where you deploy the capital and then you're investing the yield in companies. Actually, a friend of mine started a company in this area, but to do it for good is a very, very interesting area as well. I think, this community, and by extension, I think FarCon is going to come to Rome next year, which for those who don't know, it's a festival for people who are on Farcaster, which is an open source Web3 sort of approach to like Twitter but you can also build apps on it. Very interesting. So I think that's also a really interesting sort of way forward for the industry, because I think we can come together on these platforms with smart applications and smart communities as well, towards hopefully smart contract driven development. I'm leaving it there because I don't know the answer to how AI is going to affect public goods, but I just wanted to provoke some ideas. And yeah, thanks. That's what I had to say.
That was enlightening. Thank you so much, Vishal. It was amazing.